Welcome to Underworld UK, where Britain's darkest stories are brought to light. From the gritty streets of gangland London, Liverpool, Manchester and Birmingham, from Curtis Warren to the Cray twins to county lines and modern-day true crime, we cover everything. Bringing you new videos every week. Subscribe so that you'll be notified when the next video is put out.
Imagine you're a drug courier carrying hundreds of thousands of pounds in cash through the streets of London. Suddenly, blue lights appear in your rear-view mirror. A police officer steps out of a marked patrol car. You're searched. Your vehicle is searched. The cash is seized. To anyone watching, it looks like a routine police operation. But what if it wasn't? What if the officer conducting the stop had no intention of booking the money into evidence? What if the entire operation had been carefully planned in advance? And what if the man wearing the uniform wasn't fighting organised crime at all, but working alongside it? This is the shocking true story of Kashif Mahmood, a Metropolitan Police officer who crossed a line few officers ever do. Instead of arresting criminals, he joined them. Instead of protecting the public, he used police resources to enrich an organised crime gang. And for months, he helped orchestrate a scheme so audacious that even seasoned investigators struggled to believe it. It was a story involving corrupt policing, organised crime, drug trafficking, money laundering, encrypted phones, and a criminal network stretching from the streets of East London all the way to Dubai. And in a twist nobody could have predicted, the very police officers Mahmood worked alongside would unknowingly help expose the operation that brought everything crashing down. Before we get into the story, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think a corrupt police officer causes more damage than an ordinary criminal? Or do they deserve to be judged differently because of the trust placed in them? To understand how this happened, we need to understand the man at the centre of it. On paper, Kashif Mahmood looked like someone who had beaten the odds. He achieved his childhood dream of becoming a police officer at just 21 years old. According to information later presented in court, Mahmood had experienced a difficult upbringing. At one point during his youth, he was reportedly stabbed after refusing to join a local gang. It could have been the beginning of a completely different life. Instead, he joined the Metropolitan Police and spent years building a career in law enforcement. To colleagues and members of the public, he wore the same uniform as every other officer. He carried the same powers. He represented the same institution. But somewhere along the way, something changed. By 2020, Mahmood had become involved with a sophisticated organised crime group operating across London. The gang's leadership consisted of brothers Mohsin Khan, Shahzad Khan and Shabazz Khan, alongside several associates. Prosecutors would later describe the operation as highly lucrative, generating enormous sums of criminal cash through drug trafficking and money laundering. At the heart of the scheme was a simple but incredibly effective idea. Drug traffickers frequently move huge quantities of cash between locations. Sometimes these transfers involve hundreds of thousands of pounds at a time. Criminal organisations rely on trusted couriers to transport this money safely. Normally, rival gangs would need to rob the courier to steal the cash. But what if you had something even more powerful than a rival gang? What if you had a genuine police officer? According to investigators, that was exactly what the Khan brothers had. The organised crime group began receiving intelligence about criminal cash movements. The information allegedly originated from a figure based in Dubai named Mujaba Nismand. Nismand operated under the EncroChat handle SSNew. At the time, EncroChat was one of the most trusted communication systems in the criminal underworld. The encrypted network was used almost exclusively by organised criminals who believed their messages were beyond the reach of law enforcement. Drug traffickers, money launderers, organised crime groups and gang leaders used the platform to coordinate criminal activity on an industrial scale. Believing their conversations were secure, many users spoke openly about crimes that would eventually lead directly to their downfall. And among those users were members of the gang working with Kashif Mahmood. When information arrived about large amounts of cash being moved by drug couriers, the gang referred to the opportunities as jobs. These weren't ordinary robberies. They were carefully planned operations. Details would be passed through the network until they reached Mohsin Khan. From there, the information would allegedly be relayed to Mahmood, and that was where the badge came in. Unlike ordinary criminals, Mahmood didn't need disguises. He didn't need stolen vehicles. He didn't need fake credentials. He had access to something far more valuable: the full authority of a Metropolitan Police officer. According to investigators, Mahmood would book out police vehicles and use police resources to carry out what appeared to be legitimate law enforcement activity. Sometimes he used marked police cars, sometimes unmarked vehicles. Either way, anyone witnessing the stop would have no reason to suspect anything unusual. The target would be pulled over. The vehicle would be searched. The money would disappear. And because the operation appeared completely legitimate, many victims had little choice but to accept what had happened. After all, how does a drug courier explain to his bosses that hundreds of thousands of pounds have vanished after a police stop? How do you complain about stolen criminal cash? And perhaps, most importantly, how do you convince fellow criminals that you aren't lying? Investigators later argued that Mahmood's actions placed those couriers in significant danger. Many of them would have faced serious questions from the criminal organizations they worked for. Some may have been suspected of stealing the money themselves. Others could have faced violent consequences. Meanwhile, the gang was making enormous profits. Court proceedings later revealed that the conspiracy is believed to have seized at least £850,000, with investigators suspecting the true figure may have exceeded £1 million. The operation became so successful that members of the network appeared increasingly confident. In one EncroChat message, the Dubai-based figure allegedly boasted about the scale of their activities. According to prosecutors, he claimed the system was effectively under their control and suggested they could continue indefinitely. For a time, it looked as though he might be right. The gang had access to intelligence. They had criminal contacts. And most importantly, they had a serving police officer willing to abuse his powers for their benefit. But every criminal enterprise eventually makes a mistake. And in March 2020, that mistake arrived in the form of pure bad luck. The operation that would eventually expose Mahmood began with a target the gang believed was carrying a substantial quantity of criminal cash. What they didn't know was that the courier was already being watched by police. Officers from the Metropolitan Police's proactive money laundering team had the individual under surveillance as part of an entirely separate investigation. They had no idea that another police officer was about to enter the picture. As the courier travelled through Chingford in East London, a marked police vehicle arrived. Inside were Kashif Mahmood and his accomplice, Io and Gurgel. To anyone watching, it appeared to be a completely legitimate police stop. The courier's vehicle was pulled over and searched. A bag containing a substantial amount of cash was seized, along with a further £2,000. No arrest was made. No proper police procedure followed. The money simply vanished into the hands of the conspirators. Unfortunately for Mahmood, the surveillance team witnessed enough of the encounter to become suspicious. Experienced officers know when something doesn't feel right. The stop raised questions. Why had this vehicle been searched? What intelligence had led to the operation? Where was the paperwork? And perhaps most importantly, who exactly was the second officer sitting in the patrol car? The surveillance team approached Mahmood to find out what was happening. Confident in his position, Mahmood identified himself as a police officer. Gurgel also claimed to be a police officer. The problem was that he wasn't. Investigators later discovered that Gurgel had been posing as an officer while wearing police equipment provided by the conspiracy. When questioned about the stop, Mahmood allegedly claimed he was conducting anti-drug activity in the area and that the search formed part of an ongoing operation. The explanation did little to ease concerns. The officers remained suspicious. Soon afterwards, the matter was referred to the Metropolitan Police Directorate of Professional Standards. Then something else happened. The courier himself attended a police station and reported that money had been taken from him by a police officer. Think about that for a moment. A suspected criminal was walking into a police station to complain that a police officer had stolen money from him. It's not a report officers hear every day. As investigators began digging deeper, even more problems emerged. Mahmood's body-worn camera had accidentally captured evidence. The device was inadvertently activated, recording images of Gurgel sitting inside the police vehicle while dressed as an officer. That footage would later become a crucial piece of evidence, but the conspiracy still wasn't finished. Just weeks later, another operation allegedly took place. On the 25th of March 2020, Mahmood travelled across London in a police vehicle. Investigators said he stopped at an address in Stratford before heading towards Wembley at speeds reaching almost 100 miles per hour. The target on this occasion was believed to be carrying approximately £450,000. Again, the money allegedly represented proceeds from drug trafficking. Again, the gang moved in. Again, criminal cash disappeared. Each successful operation emboldened those involved. The money kept flowing. The risk appeared manageable. And from their perspective, they had an almost unbeatable advantage. Who would ever suspect a serving Metropolitan Police officer? Yet while Mahmood and his associates believed they were operating in secret, another threat was developing beyond their control. Thousands of miles away, law enforcement agencies were quietly preparing one of the biggest breakthroughs in modern organised crime investigations. The target wasn't Mahmood. It wasn't the Khan brothers. It wasn't even their gang specifically. The target was EncroChat itself. For years, criminals across Europe had trusted the encrypted network with their most sensitive conversations. Drug deals, money laundering operations, violent conspiracies, firearms trafficking, murder plots. Users believed their communications were impossible to intercept. They were wrong. In early 2020, French investigators, working alongside cyber specialists and international law enforcement partners, successfully infiltrated the network. Suddenly, messages that criminals believed were secret were being read in real time. Across Europe, organised crime groups unknowingly continued discussing their activities while investigators watched. The result was devastating. Thousands of suspects were eventually identified. Hundreds of criminal networks were exposed. And among those conversations were messages linked to the conspiracy involving Kashif Mahmood. The encrypted chats painted an increasingly detailed picture of how the operation worked. Investigators could see discussions about cash movements. They could see references to jobs. They could see communications linking gang members together. And slowly, the evidence began stacking up. Phone data was analysed. Vehicle movements were examined. Financial records were scrutinised. Investigators mapped the relationships between those involved. The conspiracy that had once seemed invisible was becoming clearer with every passing day. Then came the arrests. On the 28th of April 2020, Kashif Mahmood was arrested. The police officer who had once carried out stops in uniform now found himself on the other side of a criminal investigation. As officers searched properties connected to the gang, significant amounts of cash were discovered. Investigators also uncovered evidence pointing towards a lifestyle that appeared increasingly difficult to explain. Court proceedings later heard allegations of expensive trips to Dubai. There were luxury purchases. There was a Rolex watch reportedly worth around £6,000. Although Mahmood's defense team would later challenge aspects of this portrayal, arguing that he had not been living extravagantly and that some of the watches seized were counterfeit, the damage was already done. The evidence against him continued to grow. Meanwhile, prosecutors were building a case not only against Mahmood, but against the wider organised crime group. The Khan brothers faced allegations involving Class A drug supply, criminal property offences, and money laundering conspiracies. The scale of the criminal enterprise was becoming impossible to ignore. As investigators continued reviewing communications, another surprising development emerged. Attention turned towards Mahmood's wife, Shireen Kashif. She was also a serving Metropolitan Police officer, and according to investigators, she had become involved after learning what her husband had been doing. When officers arrived to arrest Mahmood during a late-night operation in April 2020, something significant happened inside the property. A box containing cash disappeared. Investigators later concluded that Shireen Kashif had hidden the box after police arrived. The cash was never recovered. To this day, authorities do not know exactly how much money was inside. For detectives, it represented a major frustration. Potential evidence had vanished forever. The missing cash became yet another obstacle in an already complex organised crime investigation. As investigators continued examining encrypted communications, they found evidence which allegedly revealed her involvement in concealing the money. When questioned following her arrest, she later admitted she knew what her husband had been doing and had failed to report him. For a police officer, that admission carried enormous consequences. The oath she had taken required honesty, integrity, and a commitment to upholding the law. Investigators argued she had abandoned those responsibilities in order to protect her husband. And now, she too faced criminal proceedings. By this stage, what began as a corruption case involving one officer had expanded into something much larger. It was now a story involving organised crime, drug trafficking, money laundering, abuse of police powers, encrypted communications, and multiple criminal conspiracies operating across London. Eventually, the defendants chose to plead guilty to various offences. The evidence against them had become overwhelming. For Mahmood, the moment of reckoning finally arrived at Southwark Crown Court. The man who had once patrolled London's streets as a Metropolitan Police officer now stood before a judge awaiting sentence. Everything he had worked towards was gone. His career, his reputation, his future in policing, all destroyed by the choices he had made. During sentencing, the court heard how Mahmood had abused the trust placed in him as a serving police officer. Judge David Tomlinson described his actions as an abuse of power, trust, and responsibility. The judge also made clear that Mahmood had exploited not only members of the public, but his fellow police officers, using the legitimacy of the force as a shield for criminal activity. This wasn't a case of a momentary lapse in judgment. It wasn't a single mistake. It was a calculated conspiracy that had operated over an extended period of time. A conspiracy that relied upon the authority of a police uniform. A conspiracy that allowed organised criminals to steal vast sums of money while hiding behind the appearance of legitimate law enforcement. The court heard that the operation had acquired at least £850,000 in criminal cash, although investigators believed the true figure could have been considerably higher. Judge Tomlinson also highlighted another consequence of the scheme. The drug couriers targeted by Mahmood and his associates were often placed in serious danger. Many would have struggled to explain the loss of huge amounts of money to the criminal organisations that employed them. Some may have been accused of theft. Others could have faced violent repercussions. In the criminal underworld, Losing hundreds of thousands of pounds rarely ends with a simple apology. After considering all the evidence, Mahmood was sentenced to 8 years in prison after pleading guilty to conspiracy to acquire criminal property and misconduct in public office. His sentence had been reduced from an initial 12 years due to his early guilty plea. As the sentence was delivered, reports suggested Mahmood showed little visible reaction. The boyhood dream he had once achieved was over. He would never again serve as a police officer. He had already been dismissed from the Metropolitan Police without notice following a gross misconduct hearing. His name would ultimately be added to the College of Policing's barred list, permanently preventing him from working in policing again. But Mahmood wasn't the only person facing justice. The wider organised crime group also received lengthy prison sentences. Mohsin Khan, described as one of the key figures in the conspiracy, was sentenced to 16 years in prison for offences relating to Class A drug supply, criminal property and money laundering. His brothers, Shahzad Khan and Shahbaz Khan, received sentences of 15 years and 14 years respectively. Maria Shah was sentenced to more than 5 years imprisonment. Ayo Gurgel, the man who posed as a police officer during the fake stops, received a 6-year prison sentence. Collectively, the gang received decades behind bars. What had once appeared to be a highly profitable criminal enterprise had completely collapsed. And yet there was still one final chapter to the story: the case against Shireen Kashif. Unlike her husband, she had not participated in the roadside stops. She had not worn a police uniform while carrying out criminal operations. But prosecutors argued that she had knowingly interfered with an investigation by concealing criminally obtained cash. The court heard how she hid a cash-filled box when officers arrived to arrest her husband. That box has never been recovered. Investigators have never been able to determine how much money was inside. For detectives who spent years piecing together the conspiracy, it remains one of the lingering mysteries of the case. How much criminal cash disappeared that night? And where did it ultimately end up? Those questions may never be answered. Shireen Kashif later admitted she knew what her husband had been doing and had failed to report him. She was sentenced to 2 years imprisonment, suspended for 21 months, and ordered to complete unpaid work. Like her husband, she was dismissed from the Metropolitan Police. Her policing career ended in disgrace. For investigators, however, the case represented something much bigger than the downfall of one corrupt officer. It was a reminder of how dangerous police corruption can be. Organised crime groups have always sought influence. They seek information. They seek protection. And whenever possible, they seek insiders. Because a criminal with access to a police officer possesses something incredibly valuable: knowledge, authority, and the ability to exploit public trust. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this case is that the conspiracy wasn't exposed by a whistleblower. It wasn't uncovered by a rival gang. And it wasn't brought down because the criminals suddenly developed a conscience. Instead, it collapsed because of a series of mistakes. A suspicious vehicle stop, an accidentally activated body-worn camera, a courier willing to report what had happened, and an encrypted phone network that criminals believed was untouchable. Piece by piece, investigators assembled the puzzle until the entire operation stood exposed. The fallout reached from the streets of East London to organised crime networks operating overseas. It dismantled a gang. It ended multiple criminal careers. And it sent a serving police officer to prison. The Independent Office for Police Conduct later described Mahmood's behaviour as audacious, corrupt and criminal. Few would disagree. Because at the heart of this story lies a betrayal that goes beyond stolen money. The public expects criminals to break the law. That's what criminals do. But society places a different expectation on police officers. They are entrusted with extraordinary powers. They can stop people, search vehicles, make arrests, and use force when necessary. Those powers exist because the public believes they will be used lawfully. When an officer abuses that trust for personal gain, the damage extends far beyond the crime itself. It damages confidence, it raises questions, and it casts a shadow over the thousands of honest officers who do their jobs correctly every day. In the end, Kashif Mahmood didn't become the police officer he once dreamed of being. Instead, he became something far more infamous. A serving Metropolitan Police officer who joined forces with organised criminals, used police resources to target drug couriers, and helped steal hundreds of thousands of pounds under the cover of legitimate policing. For a time, he believed he had found the perfect crime. A badge. A patrol car. And victims who couldn't safely go to the police. But no criminal conspiracy lasts forever. Eventually, the evidence catches up. Eventually, the mistakes pile up. And eventually, even those hiding behind a uniform are forced to answer for their actions. What do you think about this case? Was Kashif Mahmood simply another corrupt officer motivated by greed? Or do crimes committed by police officers deserve to be viewed as more serious because of the trust placed in them? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Britain's most shocking police corruption cases, make sure to subscribe to Underworld UK for more stories covering. See you next time.